Yeah, so we've been in this series called Modern Love, where we've been talking about dating. And first week we trying to remember what we talked about over the past. It's been a while. Um, yeah, we talked about finding the one. The very first week we talked about finding the one, because I think that's like the goal. It seems like uh, for teenagers, and you're like, especially like when you're graduating, like I need to find the one, I need to find the person to be with. And we talked about before you can find the one, you need to become the one, right? Um, and so instead of like focusing right now on finding this person to be with, like spend time becoming the person to be with, if that makes sense. So instead of discovering, uh, we talked about that development is greater than discovery. So to develop into the character, to be a person that is worth being with, I guess. And we talked about that the first week, and we used the let's see, I'm trying to remember what we used there. Yeah. Anyways, so that was first week, and then a few weeks ago we talked about basically dangerous dating, and we talked about the story of Jacob and Leah, and we talked about um, pretty much that about the dangers of dating, um, and uh, basically we talked about three things: is that if you date before you're ready to date, you'll compromise. So you'll compromise some things. The quickest way to end up with the wrong person is to rush into the relationship. Um, and then we also talked about do they push your physical boundaries? Um, and then we talked about if you rush into dating and you date before you're ready, you can become demanding, which is what Jacob did. And then we also talked about you become eventually dissatisfied if you're not ready. Jacob got to the place to where he was married to Leah, which he actually desired Rachel because she was the pretty one. He ended up with her other sister, which wasn't the pretty one. And he was dissatisfied in that relationship, and he wanted a different relationship. He wanted out of the relationship. So today, we're going to talk about our third topic. And when I was younger, and probably still to this day, I feel like I'm a rule breaker. I don't like to stay within the boundaries. I don't like to stay within the borders. If there's a way to like manipulate it or get by it, like I feel like I like to like push those boundaries. Like if your parents set a rule for you in the house, like if they're not there, you try to get away with it. Anybody that tries to push the boundaries in here will be honest. Like you just try it, like you're a rule breaker, pusher, breaker. Okay, so we got some honest ones. That's cool. Yeah, I always push the rules in school and all these things. I did so many things in school that I don't know how I got away with. But it was like one of those things like where you would push the boundary far enough to where it was like you had like these unspoken rules, but there wasn't really any rule for it, but you knew it probably wasn't right to do it. Like, for instance, like some of you here in this game tonight, it's like, oh, I'll just stack all the cups up and I'll just run off and take the cups. Like, you're probably a rule breaker, right? Like, it's like we didn't really share that rule, but you know what I'm talking about, right? And for instance, like when I first got my license, like if I knew I was in like a certain area where there was no cops or something like that, I'm probably going to go over the speed limit, right? Like don't take my advice, like don't do that. But I did that, right? And I would sometimes push those limits and go a little bit faster than I was supposed to. I feel like for years I was trying to get out of speeding tickets because I was so buried in speeding tickets because I got so many of them over a certain amount of time. So don't take my advice in that, and don't do what I did. What would Jesus do? But yeah. So like I'm also one of those people that will like I like to push boundaries and borders. Like I'm one of those people. Like if you've known me long enough, like I like to push the boundary so far to where it's like I'll wait till the last minute to like leave my house. I'll leave just enough time to get to that place. And then lots of times I'm speeding because I'll get behind like a tractor or a slow truck or something like that. And then I'm like, hurry up, because I'm rushing to get there. And these aren't good qualities to have. I'm just like letting you know that these are struggles that I have. Like I like to push the boundaries, and then I usually end up being late for lots of things. And my leaders are like, yep, you sure do. But imagine if we lived like legit. Like imagine like here in Mount Orb, imagine like where you live at. Imagine there was no speed limits, right? None at all. Like you can just go as fast as you want whenever you want. Like that probably wouldn't be a good idea, right? Because you don't want to meet someone coming at you going 100 miles an hour, right? And I actually saw this as a statistic. So imagine there's no speed limit. So high-speed chases, like you've probably seen high-speed chases on TV and stuff, right? Usually what happens in those high-speed chases, they usually end up in a wreck or a crash, right? They usually end up, actually it says that 41% of high-speed chases end in a fatality. That's kind of crazy. So almost half of high-speed chases end in a fatality. That's why we have limits and borders in place, like rules in place. Like, God put these rules in place in the beginning, these 10 commandments, right? Like, don't kill, don't steal, honor your mother and father. Like, these are all things where God's like putting these things in place to help us out and to help us and to help us out in life. But maybe for some of you, you know what it's like to break the rules. And today I actually experienced this with my own kids, breaking the rules. And I wasn't too happy about it. And I'm thinking, well, I guess you reap what you sow, Jamie. And I went outside. I went outside in the back of my house, and my two little girls, 5 and 3 years old, and then my boy was missing. So my boy's 8. I didn't see him anywhere. Went down in my woods. I'm like screaming, yelling for them. They are nowhere to be found. I have to go deep into the woods all the way back and just keep walking, and I'm still screaming for them. And I'm to the point where I'm about to call 911 because I think maybe someone kidnapped my children because they're nowhere at all. They were playing outside, and I get finally deep enough in the woods, and I hear my oldest son saying, "We're coming." And I'm like, what in the world? Like they were like so far back, like walking the creek in our woods, and they just kept walking through the creek in our woods and just thought that was okay. But I was not happy because I'm like, anything could have happened out there, and like if they would have been that far, I couldn't have helped them. They couldn't have heard me, and it wouldn't have been a good situation, right? But maybe some of you guys know what that's like to break the rules and boundaries. And if I were to title this message, you guys will think this is creative. I would title it, "How Far I'll Go." So yeah, that's my creative title for tonight. So yeah, if you're, anybody know what movie that's from? Moana. Yeah. So, how far I'll go. Okay. So yeah, that's what I would title tonight. So I think the question is when it comes to dating is, how far is too far when it comes to dating? Like if you're trying to like live a Christian life, I think we all want to know is like, how far is too far when it comes to dating? Because you might be asking like, well, is hugging too far? Is holding hands, is that too far? Is kissing, is that too far? And like, imagine like, okay, like imagine like this here is like, this is like all the way, this is sex, right? Imagine like, okay, well, we're good with holding hands. Like that's okay. All right, well, I can hug them. Like there's nothing wrong with that, right? And then it's like, okay, I'm gonna like, we can kiss, right? Like that's okay. Like we're just kissing. There's nothing wrong with that. And then it's like, oh man, like now it's like this kissing thing, like I want to go farther because I can't control myself. Like it feels good. I like the way that you make me feel when we do this. And it's like you get to this point and it's like, it's touching, it's everything but sex, but it's so close. And it's like, it's hard when you get to this point. Because when you get to this point, it's really hard to control yourself to not get to this point. And I can tell you that because I've experienced this, right? And I know that might seem, I just want to kind of give you that visual there. But man, like, how far is too far? Like how far should I go? Like what is okay? What is acceptable? Because honestly, if like just holding their hand and it's like lusting, it's leads you to these other thoughts and stuff, it's like, ooh, like I can't even control myself holding this person's hand right now. You know what I mean? Like maybe that's your border. And it's like, oh, like that's dumb, you know? And I get it, right? But I think you know what I'm saying is like how far is too far for you? How far is too far? Because if you're not content with this, 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 eventually it's going to lead to that. And instead of pushing the boundaries to see how close you can get without messing up, we should be asking ourselves is how close during this single season of my life, because even if you're dating someone right now, even if you have a boyfriend or girlfriend, that's still considered your single season because you're not married yet, right? Even if you're in this dating season right now, I think the question is how, not how close can I get to this border without failing, but during this season, how close can I get to Jesus? And I want to start with this verse tonight. This is, some of you guys have heard this story about a guy by the name of Joseph, right? Anybody ever heard the story of a guy by the name of Joseph? Not Jesus' dad, but the other Joseph, like the original, the OG Joseph, right? The original one. Okay, so you got this story about this guy named Joseph, right? Now, so give you a little backstory on Joseph. He comes out. He's his dad's favorite kid, right? And all of his older brothers know it. Like, he's the youngest, and he's got these older brothers. And his dad makes him this like special, really awesome coat, right? He's got the Gucci coat on, and his brothers are over here, and they're wearing like I don't know what's a terrible brand. They're wearing like Spalding coat, or I don't know what's like. Walmart brand coat, right? Like they got like on Sam's Choice coat, and it's like really terrible quality. And he walks out, and his dad makes him this custom-made coat, right? And he's like bragging about this coat, and his brothers don't like him. And he tells his brothers this vision that God gave him, that one day they're going to bow down to him. And you could tell like they're not having it. And he just keeps going back and telling him like all the things that God's like telling him, like, hey, one day, guys, you're going to bow down before me, you know, and like, yeah, you're going to worship me. It's like, oh, cool. And like you can imagine like how mad they are at their brother. So one day Joseph's walking along, and he goes to like take his brothers their lunch, and they end up seeing him in the distance, like, hey, what are we going to do? We're going to kill him, right? They're like plotting in their mind, and the oldest brother's like, no, we can't kill him. Let's just throw him into a pit. So they throw him into a pit. And they're going to like leave him there to die, right? Because they're like so that they don't like him. They don't like that he's bragging about. They're the dad's favorite and all that stuff. So they throw him in a pit, and then these travelers come by, and they're like, hey, let's not leave him to die. Let's just sell him into slavery. We'll get some money. Like, hey, this is a win-win situation. And we'll just tell our dad, like, hey, like, sorry, he got killed by a bear or something. And so they sell him into slavery. He ends up going to a guy by the name of Potiphar, which is basically in charge of all of Egypt. He's in charge of like Pharaoh's army and all that stuff. So he goes into Potiphar's house, and that's where we start our story. And he gets into Potiphar's house, and Potiphar's wife, we'll just call her Potiphar, okay? She's over there. She's trying to mess with Joseph. She's trying to like manipulate him, trying to like get him to do things that he knows isn't right or honoring. And that's kind of where we start our story. So Potiphar's wife is trying to entice Joseph. And let's just tell you about what Joseph is. Now, Joseph was well-built and handsome, right? And after a while, his master's wife took notice of Joseph and said, come to bed with me. But he refused. With me in charge, he told her, my master does not concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns he has entrusted to my care. No one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you. Because you are his wife, how then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" And though she spoke to Joseph day after day, so she's trying to like entice him day after day, here's what he did. He refused to go to bed with her or even be with her. Like he wasn't even being around this woman. One day he went into the house to attend to his duties, and none of the household servants was inside. She caught him by his cloak and said, "Come to bed with me." But he left his cloak in her hand and ran out of the house. When she saw that he had left his cloak in her hand and had run out of the house, she called her household servants. "Look," she said to him, "this Hebrew boy has been brought to us to make sport of us. He came in here to sleep with me, but I screamed. When he heard me scream for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house." So she's accusing him of something that he didn't do, right? And what does he do in this moment? Joseph was saying, you know what, I refuse to put myself in that situation, because if you look back early in that verse, it says he refused to go to bed with her or even be with her, which tells me he was making sure, I'm not even, for one, I'm definitely not going to bed with this woman, but for sure, I'm not even going to be around this woman, right? He was setting up, what was he setting up right there? He was saying, all right, I'm not going any farther with this woman because I can see this woman's trouble. I can see that she's nothing but bad news. I'm not going to set myself up for failure in this situation. He wasn't going to put himself in a position to fail or to fall. 1 Corinthians 6:18, it says, "Flee from sexual immorality. All other sins a person commits are outside the body, but whoever sins sexually sins against their own body." 1 Corinthians 6:18. Every time you are in that situation, what's it say here? It says, "Flee from sexual immorality." So what did Joseph do in this situation? He was saying, all right, I'm not even getting close to this woman. And he's like, run. So what does it mean to flee from sexual immorality? It means to run, like run for your life, like get away from it. If you sense that, like get away from it, like don't even entertain it at all. Every time you're in that situation, what's it say right here? 1 Corinthians 10:13. "No temptation has overtaken you except what is common to mankind." So let's stop there. So any temptation that you face, any like lustful thought or thought of like a girl in a certain way or guy in a certain way, like know that you're not alone in those thoughts. Like none of those temptations that you're having, temptation to be with a girl, temptation to be with a guy, like none of those temptations that you are having is like every one of them is common to mankind. And God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. So that means like you're able, God's saying like I've put it in you to overcome that temptation, right? But when you are tempted, he will also provide a way out so that you can endure it. So when you are tempted, when you're like, oh, this is a temptation, God's saying, if you just look around, if you just stop a second, like I've got a way out of the situation, okay? So how far should we go? How far is too far? And the thing that I've realized about boundaries in my life is that I think a lot of times we think that boundaries are set up like I tell you these things from here to prevent you from having fun and all that stuff, right? Or like, and I think sometimes like we can think like, man, like I feel like God's holding out on something for me. Like I feel like I'm gonna miss out if I like don't, hook up all the time. I'm gonna miss out on something. I think there's this temptation to believe like, man, if I don't do this, if I don't have sex for marriage, like I need to like test the car before I drive it, right? Like I need to experience this stuff, right? Like I need to how do I know if I'm going to like be compatible with that person if I don't do this? And I think there's this temptation that the enemy is saying like, hey, you need to do this, right? Everybody else is, right? Like especially if you go to school, like that temptation's a real thing. But what I'm trying to say is that boundaries are meant to protect you. They're not meant to patrol you. They're meant to protect you. And I wish that someone would have told me this stuff back then, because I thought that, you know what, I can just do these things. Like I can have sex before marriage and I'll be cool with it. Like it's not a big deal. Like I'll be fine. Like I'm a Christian. Like I'll get back in this. Like I just want to enjoy this while I'm young and I don't want to miss out. Yada, yada, yada. Boundaries are meant to protect you, not to patrol you. And I thought like it was like this, like I don't know. I thought something was being held out from me by missing out on that. But boundaries are meant to protect you, not to patrol you. Meaning, like, when you do mess up, you aren't degraded for that. That's what they're meant. Like, God puts boundaries in place because He really does love you. He knows that when you break those boundaries, you're going to get hurt, right? Same thing with like the speed limit. Like if you're going like 100 miles an hour in a 25 mile an hour zone, there's a reason that's put in place, because they don't want you to get hurt. We don't want you to hurt other people, right? The same thing is true when it comes to relational boundaries, right? Like there's a reason you need to set boundaries in place for yourself. So, what are some of the boundaries that you need to set? What are those boundaries? First thing that I would venture to say is that you need to set boundaries on your emotions. When it comes to your relationship, you need to set boundaries on your emotions. Proverbs 4:23 says, above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. So you need to guard your heart. You need to protect your heart. And I think this is a really command clear in Scripture, but I don't think it's, I think it's not as clear when it comes to dating relationships of how do you guard your heart. And I think one area to do this is to set healthy boundaries around your emotions. Because if you want to go on, especially if you've dated or you are currently dating, if you want to go on this roller coaster of emotions in your life, like, yeah, I love ups and downs. I love being happy and I love being sad. I love being disappointed. I love being jealous. Then go on a date, right? Like date somebody and date them for an extended period of time, and you'll find out what I'm talking about. It's a roller coaster, right? It's a roller coaster of emotions. And like I said, I dated, so like I'm not degrading anybody for doing that, right? Like don't think I'm looking down on you. I'm just giving you some tips and some thoughts to be thinking about. But one area to set healthy boundaries is your emotions. Because dating, it's very risky, because you're more than friends, but you're less than spouses. So it's a very risky thing, because basically when you're not friends but you're not spouses, you have a very limited commitment level, right? Like literally you could like share your emotions and all your stuff with this other person, and they could like break up with you tomorrow, right? And therefore you've just poured out your heart to this other person that you really didn't even know yet. And when you poured out your heart to this other person, you basically get crushed, like you might have gave them your heart. But the more commitment there is, the more emotional connectivity that there should be. Emotional bonds without commitment is what leads to broken hearts. You should be able to share everything with your spouse, because the two of you have made one of the greatest relationship commitments of all time, right? Like I can share anything with my wife, right? But it's a different level of commitment, right? And you should be able to share everything with your spouse because you're one. But you shouldn't share everything with a boyfriend or girlfriend level, because you're not on that commitment level yet, right? So you need to guard your heart in those ways by sharing your emotions. Like how much should you connect emotionally in a Christian dating relationship? I don't know really the answer to that. But just I would just say, like, share what you need to share to accomplish your dating goals right now in your life and in your relationships. And connect enough to where it's like, hey, I could like see myself like going more serious with this person, right? Like it might get to that point in your life and in your relationship and in your, to say like, well, I think I could marry this person, right? Like it might eventually come to that point. But you need to determine those things before you just give your heart away. And I'll share with you more of what I mean. With each increase in emotional attachment, you should add commitment. If you do this, you will get married fairly quickly. So guard your heart, and when you can guard your heart, no longer it's time to get married, so you don't need to guard your heart towards this person anymore, right? As you once did in that dating relationship. Remember, Proverbs 4:23, above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. I would just say be careful giving someone your heart, and maybe that's something that you need to reserve for marriage. I don't know. Because you don't want to just give your heart to anybody, right? It's a very serious thing, and like you don't want to just give your heart away to just anybody. And if there's no commitment in the relationship, and you give them your heart, they can break it whenever they want, right? And you don't want that to happen for your life. Never say things like here's what I mean by like emotional things. Like never say things or never allow anybody else to say things like, if you break up with me, I'm going to like kill myself or I'm going to hurt myself, right? Like they're like messing with you emotionally, right? Like trying to like make sure that when you're dating someone, like you don't say like, oh, well they're all mine, right? Like we're that they're all mine, right? Because they're not all yours. And they'll never be all yours until you marry that other person. So right now, they could be someone else's, right? That they could be someone else's, and they might not be the one that you're going to marry. So you need to put them in a position that you can feel comfortable one day shaking their future husband or their future wife's hand and saying, "Hey, I just want you to know, like while I dated, this person, I took care of them for you." You want to be able to do that. You want to have that kind of thing to where it's like you don't have that guilt and shame, like you took something away from that other person. Emotions is number one. We need to set healthy boundaries on our emotions. Second thing we need to set healthy boundaries on is our future. And just like our emotions, planning your future should happen when there is this increased level of commitment, right? The more commitment that you make with someone else, the more it makes sense to talk about your future. Because there's not really much sense to like talk about your kids' names and like, hey, where are we going to go for our family Christmas this year? Like we'll go to your family's house here, and then we'll go to my family's house on Thanksgiving. Like if you're doing that kind of stuff like right now, like you're kind of setting yourself up for failure. Especially if you've only been dating like a few months, right? Like you're talking about like your kids' names, like, hey, what do we want our kids' names to be? Like what sports do we want them to play? But you've only been like dating a few months, like right? Like you're talking about your future. Like you shouldn't be talking about those things until you're ready to have that kind of level of commitment. Because all you're going to do is increase your emotional intimacy with that other person, right? Because you're talking about your future, you're sharing your future with that other person. And it's going to influence, what that does, that influences your sexual desire for that other person because you're connecting about, your emotional, on your future. So when your commitment is too low, it's just going to create feelings that other person isn't ready for, right? And I'm not saying like you can never talk about having kids or anything like that. I think it's fine to like say like, hey, I think I'd probably like to have like 5 kids one day, or I don't really want to have kids, I think it's fine to like say things like that, but I don't think it's like fellas, I don't think it's a good idea for you to like go up to a girl and say like, I can see you being the mom of my children one day, like, oh, let's not go there, right? Like, because if you're not ready for that level of commitment, it's probably not a good idea, right? And I would say like conversations about those type of things would be like when it's like, okay, man, like I feel like we've been together a while, things are getting serious. Like if it's like a medium level of seriousness, or like it's like this is very serious, like we're engaged now, like start talking about your future. Like that's a good thing to do, right? To let that other person in on it, because you need to do that. But anyways, conversations about your future need to happen once your relationship becomes more serious. So if you want to keep your heart and emotions healthy, make sure you set healthy boundaries around your future, okay? And the third thing, I think this is probably the most obvious one that you need to set boundaries for, but it comes to sex, right? This is a boundary that you have to establish before you go into a dating relationship. Like, what is your boundaries going to be? Because it's the easiest of these all to fall into, right? Because all of the sexual desires that you have are meant to be within the bonds of a marriage, right? Between one man and one woman. And the reason is because, let's just be honest, like male parts fit to female parts and female parts fit to male parts. Not male parts fit to male parts and not female parts fit to female parts. Pretty obvious, right? God designed it that way for a reason, right? So we need to go and live by the way that God designed us, right? Gosh, this is so awkward when God gives me stuff like this. Anyways. But I think sometimes that when we talk about sex, like it can be like it's a dirty thing, right? But when you think about it, like sex was God's idea. That was his design. So that's like pretty awesome to know, like, wow, like God designed that. So it's a beautiful thing that God designed. And there's freedom inside of marriage to enjoy that with each other, right? Like that's a boundary that you need to set. So anything done with your spouse, like that's a good thing, right? Anything done outside of that is not God. It's sin, right? So how far is too far? Keep bringing up that question. What are you allowed to do in dating? Is kissing okay? What about just spooning on the couch, right? Like what's that boundary? Well, let me read this 1 Corinthians 7, 1 through 10 real quick. Now concerning the matters about which you wrote, it is good for a man not to have sexual relations with a woman. But because of the temptation to sexual immorality, each man should have his own wife and each woman her own husband. The husband should give to his wife her conjugal rights, and likewise the wife to her husband. For the wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. Likewise, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. Do not deprive one another, except perhaps by an agreement for a limited time, that you may devote yourselves to prayer, but then come together again. Why do we come together again? So that Satan may not tempt you because you lack self-control. Now, as a concession, not a command, I say this. I wish that all of you were like myself, but each of you has your own gift from God, one of one kind and one of another. To the unmarried and the widows, I say that it is good for them to remain single, as I am. But if they cannot exercise self-control, they should marry, for it is better to marry than burn with passion. To the married, give this charge, not I, but the Lord. The wife should not separate from her husband. So sex is meant to be in this boundary of marriage, right? And I give this little illustration because I think this is an illustration that God showed me, and I actually wrote this message like 2 hours before I came here. So bear with me. I know it's kind of scattered. But what the enemy wants to do right now is to get you, like right now, like, okay, so you guys are not married, right? Like how many of you are married right now? Okay, we got two couples that's married. Oh, three couples. Yeah, three. Yeah. So we got three couples married in the back, right? They're not in youth group, okay? So that's to get that out of your mind. Like they're like, wow, these are high school kids. No, these are our leaders. So what the enemy wants you to do right now. So imagine like this is a container. This is God's design for marriage in this container, right? What the enemy wants to do is he wants you to break into this container and to get what is in there, right? Before it's time. That's what he wants to do. But it's outside of marriage. So what he wants to do is he wants you to like push the boundaries, and what he wants to do is to get you to get inside of this container, right? That's what he wants you to do, especially if you're not married right now. He wants you to get inside this container. Like sex is amazing and fun inside of marriage. It's in this container. So what the enemy wants to do is to get you to get into this container. He wants you to break into this container, right? He wants you to like rip open this container and get in there, right? That's what he wants to do. And if you break this boundary, if I go in and I like break this, if I like rip this cup, like I'm fracturing my boundary, right? I'm fracturing my container. Now, if I do something to someone else sexually, I'm not just fracturing my container, I'm also fracturing their container. And whenever you're married, the enemy, what he does is he kind of flip-flops it, right? Because when you're married, you're now inside the container, right? Like there's freedom in the container. Like go wherever you want, do whatever you want. Like there's freedom in that with a husband and wife, right? But what the enemy wants to do when you're in the marriage is he wants you to get everything outside of the container. Do you understand what I'm saying? Like if you're having like problems in your marriage, like your wife is withholding from you, whatever. Like he's wanting you to say, like, hey, like your wife doesn't care. Like, hey, watch pornography. Hey, like your wife doesn't care. Like, hey, remember that woman that's giving you attention at work? You remember that guy that's giving you attention at work? Like, hey, there's all these things fighting for your attention outside of the container once you're married. Does that make sense? It's kind of like the enemy flip-flops it once you get married, right? So it's like you're safe in the container. Once you get married, it's like you're in the container, and he's trying to get you out of the container. Now, what happens when you get out of the container, right? It just pours out. Now, if I would pour this on the ground right now, it'd make a really big mess, wouldn't it? Think about this picture here. So we got a river, right? Beautiful glass river, right? It's flowing, it's smooth. It's inside of a boundary, right? There's no issues with it right now. Now, what happens when that same river gets out of the banks? What happens to it? Here's what happens to it when it gets out of the banks. It will devastate an entire town, entire cities. People die in it. People get hurt in it. People get devastated because it's no longer in the boundary. And I think that's the same thing with what happens when we try to have sex before marriage and we try to get into this boundary. We fracture it. It gets out of the boundary. And just think about it. Like you have something like this happen. Now these people won't have their homes anymore. They basically have to like rebuild everything because now the drywall on their wall, it's going to be like, it's going to have like mold and stuff growing on it, all this stuff. It just basically, it devastates everything. It destroys everything. And I think that's what the enemy wants to do in your life and in your relationships is to get you to just break into the container, to break into the border. And I think we got to just be able to say, like, you know what, I can't, I cannot break this border. I got to make sure that I'm staying far from this container. What did Joseph do? He fled from this woman. He ran from her, right? That's why that when you're married, it's important. What it says there, like what's he say? It says, it says basically, what's it say there? It says, don't deprive each other in this way. Like, don't deprive each other. When you're in this container and you're married to someone someday, like it's saying, don't deprive from that other person, right? Why is that? Because you can't lack self-control, right? And if you're not fulfilling that in your marriage one day, the temptation is going to be to go outside of this container because you can't lack self-control. Let's just be honest, guys. The enemy in your schools and everything, it's like there is no container anymore, right? Because there's so much sexual immorality, and that comes with like everything is just so sexualized, like gender, all this stuff, right? Like some of you probably have people in your school that are saying like they're transgender, that they are, they're homosexual, all this stuff. And it's basically saying, I don't care about the container, and they're just living life the way they want to live it. And when you live life the way that you want to, it just makes a mess. It's like that flood, and it's like just doing things the way that you want to do it, and it just causes devastation. It just leads to death. So, so when you're married, like don't deprive each other. Because the enemy's going to try to sneak into this container to get you to come outside the container, to fracture your container, which is you, I guess. I don't know. Anyways, What the enemy wants to do is to bring temptation outside the container to go inside of that boundary. Let's look at 8 through 9 real quick. It says, to the unmarried and the widows, I say, so unmarried, that's you, right? It is good for them to remain single, as I am. But if they cannot exercise self-control, they should marry, for it is better to marry than to burn with passion. So, what's he saying there? So if you're currently, like if you're in a dating relationship and you can't maintain self-control with that other person, Paul's saying, like, if you can't control yourself, then you need to marry. And let's just be honest, though, guys. How many of you guys would say, like, oh, I'm ready to get married right now in this room, right? Probably not, right? So if Paul's saying, like, it's better to do that than to burn with passion for that other person, how important do you think it is to set boundaries in your life to where, like, that's not even an option for you? Because if you can't maintain self-control in a relationship, Paul's saying that you need to get married. And if you're not ready to get married, then you're obviously not ready right now to have sex, right? So how many of you would say, like, I'm ready to get married right now because I've got a good job. I make minimum wage. I work at a fast food restaurant. I make a few extra dollars for my mom and dad. I don't have my license yet, but I think it'll be okay. We can make it work, right? We can live on love. I don't think any of you guys would honestly say that, would you? And like I said, since you're not going to get married, like, that's why you have to set boundaries when it comes to sex, right? Because you do not want to enter in this container and to mess up what God has. And that's why I think that's why pornography is such a struggle, right? Is because it's desiring what's in the container. But how many of you know, like, when you do that or when you've done that, like, it just creates so much shame and bondage, and it's just like an endless cycle you can't get out of, and you just feel this all the time, like this shame and guilt all the time. And it's just not something that's good, because the enemy's trying to get what's in the container out, and he's trying to pervert what's in the container, which is good and which is what God has designed it for. When it comes to sex, it'll keep you in a bad relationship longer than you should be, because you end up becoming one flesh with that other person. It's basically you're creating a bond with that other person, and when you create that bond with that other person, like, you're creating soul ties in your life, and it's really hard to, like, get away from that, right? I've shared my story before. Like, I struggled with that for years. Like, even going to my marriage, like, I still battled with thoughts from my past of, like, thinking about that other person. And it's like, whoa, like, it just created so much drama in my marriage, and I wish that I wouldn't have done that. I wish I would have honored my wife in that way. So, like, what's some boundaries you need to set? Like, here's just some ideas. Don't be in a room alone together with your boyfriend or girlfriend. Like, if you know, like, gosh, like, I don't even want to have a hint or an option. Like, that's what Joseph did. He's like, I'm not even going to be alone with this. I'm not going to be around this woman, right? Not saying you can't be around the person you're dating, but like, don't have friends of the opposite sex that aren't mutual. I think that's a very wise thing. And never be alone with someone that's not you're dating with of the opposite sex. Like, don't be alone with them, right? Because that's just like, you don't need to create that about you or, like, thoughts about you. Like, don't even leave the room for the enemy to do anything in that way. Hang out with people that support your boundaries. I would recommend you do that. Like, if there's people that you have, friends that you have, that's like, man, I support this. Like hang out around those people. Respect each other's boundaries. That's a big one. Maybe one's okay with kissing, right? But the other's like, no, like, I think we just, like, let's just hold hands and hang out or whatever, you know. Like, you probably should honor, like, I would say in that scenario, like, I would go with the one that isn't okay with kissing, right? Because you want to honor that other person, right? So today, we need to establish boundaries for ourselves. What are the things that you need to put in place right now to protect this container? Because let's go back to this real quick. How far is too far? I don't know. You tell me, how far is too far? And you need to think about that. Because maybe you've been saying, like, it's okay to come here. But I know I'm not going to go any farther than that. Like, it's okay to come here. But you know, gosh, like that just isn't enough. And the enemy's always going to want to pull you in that direction. And I'm just saying, I'm just asking you, like, how far is too far? Is it okay? Like, oh, I'll just send them a picture of myself that's not appropriate. Like, how far is too far for you? How far? So be thinking about that. Like, ask the Lord, like, God, where is my boundary? And for some of you, I would say, like, if your boundary is here right now, and you're still struggling with having self-control because you just keep going to these next steps, I would say maybe for you, maybe it's time to push the boundary back and to step back a little bit farther, to step back away from those things and saying, like, every time we get here, every time we start kissing, this is where it leads. And I don't want to do that. So maybe for you, it's like to take a step back and say, man, I got to push the boundary back, right? So anyways, if you guys will stand with me. I just want to ask you tonight, like, where's your boundary? What are the things, like, maybe you have, maybe the enemy has just destroyed, and it's like, I don't even have a container, right? Like, it's just like, I've messed up so much. I have fallen so much sexually. I've done so much wrong to where it's like, I don't even know if I care anymore. It's like, I've gone too far. That's not true. I want to tell you tonight that the Lord wants to help you set boundaries in your relationships, to set boundaries for yourself, because He loves you. Because he wants to protect you from the things the enemy wants to use to destroy your life. And so, for you tonight, where do you need to be on that boundary? Where is it for you tonight? Where are you going to say, if you're not dating right now, or you've not dated yet, like, where are you going to establish? Where's that boundary for you? How far is too far? How far will you go? God has given each of you a beautiful container called marriage. Anything outside of that involves sex or sexually, anything at all, it's just not God's design and plan. There's a safety in marriage because you have a covenant and you have a commitment to that other person. You can give that person your heart freely. You can give that person your body physically, because that's what is meant for marriage, right? But the enemy wants to destroy it. He wants to get it outside of that container. So look, if you've gotten outside the container at all, I might have the leaders on the side of the room to pray with you. If you want to just pray for your future spouse tonight, if you want to just come and pray, like, man, I keep struggling with these boundaries. I keep falling in. Like, gosh, I have fallen into sex. I have made some bad, poor decisions. I've not been in a relationship yet, but I've basically gone all the way with pornography. I've given myself to that. And so what I want to say tonight is, like, where's the boundary for you? Where do you need to push it back tonight? And we need to protect this container with all we have. We need to protect our heart with all we have, protect our future with all we have, because God gives us a future and a hope. He's got good things. He's got plans. He puts plans in your heart, plans to succeed, plans to prosper. He's got a good future for you, a good wife for you, a good husband for you one day. And man, like, I think it's so important because nobody talks about this stuff. Let's be honest. If you go to school, no one cares about a container. Nobody cares about that. There is no borders and no boundaries. And you can see the results of it in your classmates. They're getting destroyed by it because they don't have anything set in place. They're destroying their future. They're destroying their spouse's future. So, yeah, that's all I had to say about that. But with every head bowed and every eye closed, nobody looking around, maybe you just say, like, gosh, like, I I've fallen so much, and I've pushed the boundaries, and I've fallen more than I have ever wanted to fall, and I'm not happy. I hate that I've done that. I feel a lot of shame because of that, but gosh, would you just pray for me? Remember me in prayer tonight. Like I've fallen short. Just pray for me. I see that hand. I see that hand. I see that hand. I see that hand. I see those hands. Lord, I just pray, my brothers and sisters, right now that God, they've maybe went too far. They've pushed the boundaries too far. God, would you redeem them tonight, Lord? Would you just help them tonight, God? Help them to repent of those things, Lord. Help them to ask for forgiveness, Lord. Help them to invite you in. Help them to feel your Holy Spirit. We just rebuke all shame in this place. You have no authority, no power over these students. God, I pray that you would help them to have freedom tonight. So maybe you're here and you're just like, I've not really went too far, but I feel like I've really, really struggled with the boundary part of things, and I need help with that. Would you just pray for me? Anybody else just pray for me? Like, I need help establishing boundaries in my life. I see that hand. Anybody else see that hand? I see those hands. God, would you just help these students tonight, just to help them set healthy boundaries in their life and in their relationships, God, to do that, Lord, and to walk in freedom. And God, help them to have good, godly relationships, Lord. Teach them what that looks like, Lord. Help these students to build a foundation in this youth group, Lord, to just bond together, Lord, to where they're not separated, but God, this youth group is one, and they're walking together. And they're setting a new standard of what it looks like to be a Christian, a new standard of how awesome that purity is. And God, just help them to walk in that freedom, and to not walk in this shame and in this hookup culture that they live in, Lord. I pray that, God, that they would rise above that and there would be a new standard set in their life. God, help these students to set boundaries in place, God, to where they don't fall to what the enemy has. I pray that in Jesus' name, amen. And so, if you're here, I just want you to just pray and just ask the Lord, like, hey, what are the fractures on my container? How have I fractured my container? How have I gotten into what God designed for marriage? And I've brought it out and I've fallen. And so you need to just talk to the Lord about that. And what are some, just as you're just sitting there, just invite the Holy Spirit in to just ask you, like, hey, help me to set boundaries. So I just pray that with me, everybody. Just pray that with me. Every head bowed, every eye closed. Just say, dear Jesus, help me to set healthy boundaries. I invite your Holy Spirit in. Speak to my heart. And I give my life to you right now to establish those boundaries. In Jesus' name. So as you're just sitting there, just invite the Holy Spirit in to just speak to you and just show you what your boundaries, show you how far is too far, to just speak that to you in your heart. And as you're doing that, if you need prayer for any reason, we're just going to have a short prayer time. And if you need prayer for any reasons, our leaders on the side of the room, just come and get prayer with them, come and talk to them. And we'll just have a few minutes of that, and then we'll go to our small groups. Thanks, guys.